Happy birthday, Usopp. He's not a human. So, in chapter 793, we are shown an art request which features Usopp, a Tengu, and Pinocchio, and Chopper is confused by the three because they look so similar. What is interesting about this further is that we know that Tengus now exist, at least as a myth, in the One Piece world, because Kozuki Sukiyaki, the father of Odin, dresses up like a Tengu for the majority of the Wano arc. This is also very interesting too, because the nature of a Tengu in Japanese folklore is that it is a trickster spirit. What does Usopp do for the majority of his moveset? He plays tricks on people. He shoots rotten eggs. He sets traps. He scratches his nails on a chalkboard. And I think he has this in common with a variety of other characters in the series. So what am I suggesting? Well, I'm suggesting that there is a Tengu tribe. Not necessarily meaning that Usopp is a folklore creature. No, what I'm suggesting is that he is simply a race of people with traits from other races of people, a mixed race person. So very recently, we found out in an SBS that there are different names for people who are mixed with dwarf, like there are different names for people mixed with giant. So if you are a human in dwarf, you are called a Dosundada. If you are a giant in dwarf, you are called a Zeussendodo. So I think when you have a Lunarian perhaps mixed with a Tontata or dwarf, you get a Tengu, and that is what I believe Usopp is. Now, is Usopp the only one? No, and we're going to go over that. But the first time in which we see that Usopp might not be the normal human of the Straw Hat Pirates, as we've been led to believe, is in chapter 130, in which the crew are going to drum to cure Nami. He, along with Sanji, says that they've never been sick. This is a bit of a loaded statement now, because we know that Sanji's a freak, because he's a genetically modified human and being of the Vinsmoke family, right? So the same is probably going to be said about Usopp, because it's weird that Usopp hasn't had these connotations. We've been led to believe that he's a normal human, but that's not the case. Another smoking gun for him not being a normal human is his actual anatomy. We think he just has a long nose and it's just a normal nose. However, during the fight between himself, Chopper, Miss Merry Christmas, and Mr. Four in the Alabasta Saga, when he is hit with Mr. Four's 4-ton bat, we actually see an x-ray of his skull, and there is a bone in his nose. That's not normal human anatomy. Why does he have a bone in his nose? So that is what leads me to believe that he is not a normal human. Now, what do I believe the traits of this so-called Tengu tribe are? Well, to be honest with you, and this may seem like a cop-out answer, but it's probably going to vary, because not all people are created equal in this series. Some people, even when you're talking about normal humans, some, even when they're father and son, one is significantly stronger than the other. When you look at Ace and you look at Roger, Ace is not Roger. On the flip, you look at Doflamingo and Homing. Homing is not Doflamingo. Doflamingo is not Homing. Rosiante is not even Doflamingo. So when we're looking at people of different races, like for example, Bartholomew Kuma and his father Clap, they are not equal. Kuma is made of way stronger stuff than Clap. So I say that to say what you get with the supposed Tengu tribe is going to vary, but I do think they do have some kind of holdover from the invincibility that the Lunarians are known for. If not that, or with that, they have the agricultural expertise of the Tontata and or the super strength of the Tontata. But getting back to Lunarians and how they work, when the Lunarian flame is lit on their back, their bodies are nearly invulnerable. However, when it is out, even though they are faster, they are vulnerable. So taking that in mind, I think most of the abilities of the supposed Tengu tribe are various versions of that, but simplified greatly. So for Usopp, I do think he is very, very, very durable. But that's also the reason why I think Usopp developed an interest in plants, because in the post time skip, he does use pop greens and he studied pop greens over the 2-year time skip. So that's, I think, part of the reason why he is so invested in agriculture, because the Tontada are invested in agriculture. This is the reason why, too, I think Marshall D. Teach is the way he is, the reason why he is so durable, and the reason why he is a devil fruit hunter, because the durability comes from the Lunarian side, and the interest in devil fruits comes from the Tontada side, which makes it even more obvious that this could be the case, because Tontada were used to cultivate the Smile devil fruits during the Dressrosa arc. So there is a connection there. But to return to that whole trickster aspect I was talking about earlier, the reason why I think the members of this supposed Tengu tribe are tricksters is because of the Tontada. I think it's an inverse of a Tontada trait, because we see throughout the course of the Dressrosa arc, the Tontada are a very gullible people. So perhaps when Tengus come about, that gullibility is then flipped into being very conniving and devious. We see this with Usopp, as he has a lot of different tricks and tactics in his arsenal. We see this with Teach, because he tricked the government into making him a warlord so he could get into Impel Down. We see this with Kaku, because he was an undercover agent posing as a shipwright in order to find the blueprints to Pluton. And we see this with Catherine Devon, because she has the ability of the dog fruit mythical model Nine-Tailed Fox, in which she can deceive people into believing she is someone whom she is not. We see this with Foxy, as he does a bunch of underhanded tricks during the Davy Back fight, and the slow fruit is a very deceptive power in which he can slow people down to gain an advantage over them. But this trickster motif can be played against the Tengu tribe member in question, because even though Noland is not lying when he says he found a city of gold, history remembers him as a liar, because when he and the kingdom went to the place of which the city of gold was, it was not there due to it being knocked up into the sky by the knock-up stream. So even though he's not a trickster, history remembers him as a trickster. Also, what's interesting is that, much like Usopp and Teach, actually, he is a botanist. He has an interest in plants. So that's quite interesting. But when you consider his descendant Mont Blanc Cricket, he is a trickster, because he puts up this big, weird billboard in the shape of the castle of the Lavelle Kingdom in front of his house, tricking people into believing he lives in a castle when he does not. However, when you come down to deceptive practices, Buggy and Zebek do apply here. They aren't tricksters in their traditional sense, which is interesting because Buggy is a clown. I do think the whole bit of him having the chop fruit is a bit of a trickster move. But when you consider the Muggy Ball is inherently deceptive, because it's a very, very small cannonball with the destructive capability to level a city block like a normal Buggy Ball does back in the Orange Town arc. This can be applied to Roxy Zebek, because you don't think that his sword swing would have the power of a cannon or a gigantic hammer, but it does. So in that way, his fighting style could be considered deceptive, making both he and Buggy tricksters in that way. However, Buggy has a bit more to him here, because I do think the chop fruit is deceptive, because you think you have cut him, but in reality, you can't cut Buggy. So when you're talking about the physical traits of this supposed Tengu tribe, I think they could have one of two traits. And I think in one situation, perhaps the two traits have fused together into one unique trait. So either they have a very long nose, which is a reference to how Tengu are often depicted with a very long nose, of which we've seen in One Piece, or they have a protuberance atop their head, which is obviously a reference to Tengus often being depicted with a tiny black hat called a token. So when you're talking about the ones who have long noses, I think Usopp is on this list, his mother Bettina as well. Marshall D. Teach is on this list. Rox D. Zebek, his father, is on this list. Catherine Devon is on this list. Kaku is on this list, and Foxy is on this list. Also, I would like to give an honorable mention to Mozu and Kiwi, the square Afro sisters who hung out with Frankie during the events of Water 7. Now, when we're talking about those who have the token trait, the protuberance on the head, the ones I have seen so far are Mont Blanc Noland and his descendant Mont Blanc Cricket. Now, when you're talking about the one who has a fusion of these two traits, meaning the fusion of the protuberance and the fusion of the long nose, I think that is Buggy the Clown. And I think his reference is even more obvious when you consider that various Tengu are depicted with red faces, and he just so happens to have a big red nose. I think that's all of the traits just fused together into one mega trait. That could be going off into the reeds a little bit, but that is what I think. Now, when talking about animals and Zoan transformations, one thing does remain fairly true throughout the series, but in truth, it does fluctuate a bit. However, when you have a non-human person eating a Zoan fruit, their odd or unique characteristics tend to show up no matter what form they take. You see this with Chopper, and you see this with Pierre. Even though they are animals, their original animalistic traits don't disappear no matter what form they take. You see this with other races of people as well. For example, with Kaido and Yamato. Even though they are Onis, their horns remain no matter what form they take. So when we come to characters like Usopp, even though he is not a Zoan, there is one very unique instance in which an animal takes on his visage, and it gives us a glimpse to see what he would look like if he was a Zoan. Because in a color spread, namely the Toshino Asakuma Cross One Piece color spread, we see the Straw Hats with their various animal counterparts. However, the odd one is Usopp, because Usopp is here alongside a chameleon. The chameleon doesn't look like the other animals because it bears Usopp's nose, which is quite odd. Even though there is a such thing as a horned chameleon, the horn on a horned chameleon has a horn above its nose, but here the chameleon has a long nose like Usopp, which is quite odd. So even though Usopp is not depicted as a Zoan here, it does give you some insight to how Usopp would look if he were to eat a Zoan fruit. His long nose would remain, much like how the horns of Kaido and Yamato remain when they become their hybrid in full animal states as Zoans. So this is the same story that we find with a guy that looks very much like Usopp in Kaku, the user of the Ox fruit model giraffe. Because much like Kaido and Yamato, he has a trait that does persist into other forms, because when he goes to his hybrid state, he is a square giraffe man. Now, I will say, the squareness isn't as persistent as the horns of Yamato and Kaido are, as you see them throughout all their forms, but it's still weird that he is a square giraffe in his hybrid state, because he's not a square human normally. His nose is just square. So I think this is the Dofru responding to his nature as to be something other than just a normal human. At least that's what I'm gathering. What's also quite weird about this is that we know this isn't a trait of the fruit, because if Khalifa ate the fruit, she would just be a normal giraffe woman. We see this in an SBS. So this is something that's specific to him, which is why I think he is of the Tengu tribe. What also leads me to believe that he's more than just a normal human is because of how he fights as a giraffe man, because in the fight between himself and Zoro, he is able to pull in his neck like an accordion and launch it out like a cannon, which is quite odd because no other human Zoan has this weird kind of anatomy. And it shouldn't be possible because of a variety of factors. So it does present itself as being quite strange. What's also strange about this is that when he does pull in his neck, his arms and legs shoot out and become longer, which is quite odd. However, this is not unique to him because we have seen this with another character. King, or Albert, of the former Beast Pirates is the user of the Dragon Fruit Ancient model Pterodon. During his fight with Zoro, he, like Kaku, does something pretty weird. He grabs the back of his head, right? And he pulls. Pulling on the back of his head makes the front of his face sink into itself. And then when he lets go, his entire neck launches out like a laser. So, with that being said, there's no actual explanation as to why these two can do that, which is why I think they're related, because it's so strange that they do the same thing and fight the same man. I just find it very odd. So that's the theory. Usopp, as well as many other people listed in this video, aren't exactly human, but because of them being a part of this Tengu tribe, they have been given weird anatomy thanks to being a part of this mixed race between the Tontada and the Lunarians. But with that being said, if you are enjoying this video so far, click the like button. And if you want to see more from me, click the subscribe button followed by that bell so you never miss a video. In addition, could you please hit the hype button because it does help. With that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What?